Imagine you're watching the same event on a global stage, say a military buildup on the Korean Peninsula or rising tensions in the South China Sea. Now imagine four different observers, each with a deep background in international relations, but each trained from a different theoretical tradition. The first, a classical realist, sees a struggle for power and security, a timeless contest rooted in human nature and the pursuit of dominance. The second, a classical liberal, focuses on the prospects for negotiation, on the role of democracy and international law, and asks whether institutions might help diffuse the crisis. The third, a neorealist, strips away the personalities and values, scanning the picture for the structure of the international system, looking for shifts in the balance of power, polarity, and systemic structures that constrain state behavior. And the fourth, a neoliberal, sees webs of interdependence, trade ties, international regimes, and mutual interests that might still steer states away from conflict. All four are watching the same event, but they see four different worlds. Each theory offers a distinct map of international politics. And as you now know from the earlier videos in this series, these maps shape not only how we explain global events, but they also shape the kinds of solutions we can imagine. So in this video, we'll bring these theories into direct conversation. We'll compare and contrast their assumptions, their expectations, and the worlds they reveal, as well as the ones they obscure. Because when it comes to understanding global politics, how you look at the world in part determines what you'll see. That's what we mean by ontological assumptions. What exists in the international system, and what matters most in shaping behavior. Classical liberalism and classical realism both begin from assumptions about human nature. For realists, human beings are inherently self-interested, power-seeking, and prone to conflict. That assumption flows upward to the state level. Just as people are flawed, states will act aggressively to survive in a hostile world. Classical liberals take a more optimistic view. They see human beings as capable of reason, cooperation, and moral progress. And so for liberals, international politics isn't necessarily doomed to chaos. Instead, it's shaped by values, institutions, and the choices of rational actors. Neorealism and neoliberalism shift the conversation. Rather than focusing on human nature, both theories adopt a structural view of the international system. They assume that state behavior is shaped not by individual psychology, but by the anarchic structure of the system itself. For neorealists, it doesn't matter if leaders are good, bad, wise, or foolish. The structure compels them to act in predictable, often competitive ways. States are like billiard balls on a pool table. What matters is not their internal makeup, but their position and the forces acting on them. Neoliberalism accepts this structural reality, but draws a different conclusion. Yes, anarchy exists, but so too do opportunities for cooperation. Institutions, information sharing, and interdependence can all shape state behavior, even in an anarchic world. So, while all four theories acknowledge an international system lacking a central authority, they differ in what they think drives that system: human instincts or systemic forces, morality or material constraints. And those starting assumptions ripple outward, shaping how each theory interprets global events. One of the rare points of agreement across all four theories is that the international system is anarchic. But don't confuse this with chaos. Remember that in international relations, anarchy simply means there is no overarching authority above states, no world government, no 911 to call. States exist in a self-help system where their security and their survival are ultimately their own responsibility. But despite generally agreeing on the anarchic nature of the international system, the various theories diverge on its implications and what follows from that initial condition of anarchy. For classical realists, anarchy amplifies the darker side of human nature. It creates a world where fear, mistrust, and the drive for power dominate. Without a higher authority to constrain them, states will necessarily fall into patterns of war and rivalry. It's not personal, it's structural, and it's also deeply psychological. Neorealists take that one step further. They argue that anarchy isn't just dangerous, it's deterministic. The structure of the international system, especially how power is distributed, drives state behavior. In a unipolar world, one dominant state sets the tone. In a multipolar world, uncertainty and balancing dominate. There's no escaping these structural pressures. Classical liberals, on the other hand, acknowledge anarchy but don't see it as fatal. They acknowledge that there's no world government, but maintain that that doesn't mean that order is impossible. Human beings, after all, have formed societies and laws without a Leviathan before, and for classical liberals, this suggests that reason, institutions, and shared values can overcome the constraints of anarchy. Neoliberals take that one step further by showing how states cooperate under anarchy. For them, institutions matter, not just symbolically, but functionally. They help states share information, monitor compliance, and reduce the cost of cheating. Thus, while anarchy may shape the system, it doesn't eliminate the possibility of meaningful and durable cooperation. So, in short, all four theories see an anarchic world, but whether they see that world as doomed to conflict or open to cooperation depends on deeper assumptions about what anarchy allows and what it limits. When we look at the world through each of these theories, the key question is who matters most, who has agency and the ability to make decisions that shape outcomes. In all four theories, the state remains the central actor, but what that means and who within or beyond the state matters differs. For classical realism, agency lies with powerful leaders and decision makers. Think Thucydides' Melian dialogue or Machiavelli's Prince. States are driven by human ambition, fear, and the pursuit of power. Leaders matter because their choices, informed by flawed human nature though they are, shape a state's behavior in a dangerous world. In classical liberalism, state leaders still matter, but so too do citizens. Democratic institutions, public opinion, and moral norms shape how states behave. Individuals and domestic politics are part of the story. This opens the door to seeing non-state actors, civil society, the media, even activists, as part of global politics. Now, contrast that with neorealism. Here, states are black boxes. Their internal politics are irrelevant. It doesn't matter if a country is a democracy or a dictatorship. What matters is their position in the international system. Under this framework, agency is minimized and structure becomes destiny. All states, large or small, must play the same survival game. Neoliberalism shares neorealism's structuralist view, but carves out space for more complex interactions. While states remain central, institutions gain agency too, shaping the environment in which states interact and providing rules, norms, and incentives that can alter state behavior. So, from the classical theories to the structural ones, we see a narrowing of agency. Realists and liberals focus on choices, whether driven by fear or morality. Neorealists and neoliberals focus on constraints. The system shapes what's possible. But even then, liberals leave the door open for institutions and cooperation to change the game. At the heart of each of these theories lies a fundamental question. Is peace possible, or is conflict simply inevitable in international relations? For the realist tradition, both classical and neo-realist, the answer is sobering. Conflict is not just likely, it's built into the very structure of the international system. Classical realists see conflict as a product of human nature. Fear, pride, ambition, and the endless pursuit of power. Thucydides called it the tragic cycle of war. Even well-intentioned leaders find themselves trapped in a world where mistrust and insecurity dominate. Neorealists go one step further. It's not just human nature, it's the system. In an anarchic structure with no global authority to enforce rules, states are forced to rely on themselves. They build arms, form alliances, balance against threats, not because they want to, but because they have to. Cooperation is fleeting, and peace is, at best, a temporary pause between struggles. Classical liberals, on the other hand, offer a more hopeful vision. They argue that peace is not only possible, it's attainable under the right conditions. Democratic governments are more likely to be restrained and accountable. Free trade fosters mutual benefits. International law and norms promote trust and cooperation. And according to Immanuel Kant, a world of republics could even lead to a perpetual peace. Neoliberals adopt a similar conclusion, but they get there slightly differently. Even in an anarchic world, they argue, institutions matter. Cooperation is possible not because states are naturally good, but because institutions lower the cost of cooperation. They provide information, monitor compliance, and help states overcome the temptation to defect. Peace isn't automatic, but it's strategically rational under the right institutional arrangements. So the contrast is clear. For realists, peace is rare and temporary. For liberals, it's a challenging but achievable project. And neoliberals offer the mechanism through which they believe that project can be pursued, even under anarchy. So, whether you see conflict as destiny or peace as a possibility depends on the theory you bring to the table. And those assumptions don't just explain the world, they shape how we try to change it. International institutions are everywhere: treaties, organizations, legal norms, even unwritten rules of diplomacy. But depending upon the theoretical lens, these may be central to world politics or largely irrelevant. For classical realists, institutions and norms are at best window dressing. They might reflect power or serve as tools for powerful states, but they certainly don't constrain state behavior in any meaningful way. When survival is on the line, states will ignore norms and tear up treaties. Power, not principle, rules the day. Neorealists echo this sentiment but root it in structure. For them, institutions merely reflect the distribution of power in the system. They don't change the underlying interests of states, and they can't override the logic of anarchy. In short, institutions are epiphenomenal. They follow power, they don't shape it. Classical liberals, by contrast, take institutions and norms very seriously. From the League of Nations to the United Nations, they see them as expressions of moral progress and as attempts to create a rules-based order and peaceful cooperation. Norms, like sovereignty, human rights, or non-intervention, shape behavior, expectations, and even legitimacy. Neoliberals build on this but make the argument more strategic. Institutions matter not because of moral idealism, but because they solve problems. They reduce uncertainty, increase transparency, and create reputational incentives for cooperation. Even self-interested states acting under anarchy may find it rational to follow the rules, especially when institutions make that easier, safer, and more beneficial. So here again we see a theoretical divide. For realists, institutions are weak reflections of deeper power dynamics. For liberals, especially neoliberals, they're tools that shape behavior and even redefine what's possible under anarchy. So far, we've compared how each theory sees the world, what drives state behavior, what's possible under anarchy, who the key actors are, and whether peace is achievable. But what happens when we apply these theories to the real world? Let's look at a concrete example: the US-led invasion of Iraq in 2003. Each theory offers a competing explanation and a different lesson. A classical realist might focus on the ambition of individual leaders like George W. Bush or Saddam Hussein, and see the war as a product of fear, miscalculation, or a desire for prestige. They'd likely critique the war as a reckless overreach of power without a clear strategic plan. A neorealist would point to the structure of the international system. Perhaps the United States, as the sole superpower after the Cold War ended, acted unilaterally because it could. The invasion became a reflection of an unbalanced power system and the logic of preponderance, not morality or whims of individual leaders. A classical liberal might focus on the stated goals of spreading democracy, upholding international law, and protecting human rights. Whether or not these goals were achieved is another matter, but the intent fits the liberal belief that values and institutions matter. And while many liberals supported the war in Iraq based on these stated goals, others criticized it as a misapplication of these principles. And a neoliberal would look at the breakdown of international cooperation, how the United States bypassed institutions like the UN Security Council, undermining multilateral norms. For them, the lesson is that institutions can promote peace, but only when powerful states are willing to work through them. The same event highlights four very different explanations, but it's not just about explaining the past, it's also about what each theory would recommend moving forward. Realists might caution against overreach and advocate for balancing power. Liberals would urge strengthening international law and democratic norms. Neorealists would emphasize the limits of unipolarity, and neoliberals would push for re-engagement with institutions and rules-based cooperation. This is where each theory meets practice. The specific theoretical lens shapes not only how we see the world, but what we think should be done about it. Let's pause and bring all this together. What follows is a side-by-side snapshot of the four mainstream IR theories we've been comparing. Feel free to pause the video if you'd like to take a closer look. Remember that each theory gives us a different answer to the most fundamental questions in global politics. Who matters? What causes conflict? Can peace last? Should we trust institutions? More importantly, each theory sharpens our analytical toolkit. Some help us understand power and competition, others help us grasp cooperation and change. But none of them explain everything. And that's exactly the point of this comparison, to equip you with a wide range of lenses you can use depending upon the question you're asking and the problem you're trying to solve. So, where does all that leave us? If you've made it this far in the series, you've now encountered the four major theories of international relations, and you've seen how they compare across their core assumptions, their logic, and their implications. But the goal of comparison isn't to crown a winner, it's to understand the strengths and limits of each perspective. Realism gives us insight to power and insecurity. Liberalism helps us think about cooperation, norms, and moral progress. The structural theories, neoliberalism and neorealism, offer systemic, often predictive accounts of how international systems shape the behavior of actors. Rather than choosing one theory as the answer, I think you should look at them as different tools in your toolkit, each suited to ask different kinds of questions. Ask yourself, what am I trying to explain? What variables seem the most important? Is this a story about structures, about choices, about institutions, or about human nature? That's what we call analytical pluralism, being able to use multiple theoretical lenses, not to dilute your argument, but to deepen your understanding. And as we move forward in the course, you'll have the chance to apply these theories to real world events, crises, wars, alliances, and institutions, to see how theories both help clarify and, in many ways, complicate our understandings of global politics. Because in the end, international relations isn't about memorizing theories, it's about learning how to think with them and use them in your analysis. That's it for now. Please leave any questions you have in the comment section below, and as always, thanks for watching.